When I was a little girl, back in the time when you'd sit down together as a family and watch a TV show together, one of the shows that we watched on the regular was The Waltons. How many of you watched The Waltons as well? Yeah, my mom grew up on a farm in the 30s with 6 brothers and sisters, and that show really resonated for her. It still resonates. The 1930s portrayed in the 1970s still has something to say to us in the 2026s. Because people are people. So there's this one episode, season 5, it's called The Firestorm. And it takes place as the war is starting to kind of percolate over in Europe, and it's beginning to reach out into the consciousness of small towns in America. And people are beginning to become afraid. And when people become afraid, they begin to look for something to blame or to change or to make that feeling go away. And they search for the other one who is responsible, the one that is causing the world to be turned upside down. And so in the 1930s, it was the Germans that became the other. German things, German books, German people, suddenly there was something wrong with them. John Boy, at this point, has a small press, and he publishes a weekly county newspaper. And in one edition, he publishes excerpts from Hitler's Mein Kampf to warn the community about the growing Nazi threat, and the town reacts with anger and starts to blame all the Germans. So Reverend Fordwick proposes a symbolic book burning to protest what is happening overseas. And so he gathers the community together, and the community gather up all their German books to throw into the fire. Now, John Boy, as a writer, is aghast, realizing that his article has spurred on such destructive anger. He's horrified. So he confronts the community as they are all gathered around this fire that they're about to throw these books on, and he steps forward and he picks up a book from the pile, and he asks if anyone even reads German. And so Mrs. Brummer, she's the lady that owns the boarding house, she steps forward and she takes the book, and John Boy says, "Read it to us." And she opens up the book and she starts to read. And it's in German, and none of them understand what she is saying, but there's a certain beauty to the language. And then John Boy asks her to say it again in English. And then she says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." They were about to burn a Bible. And in the hearing of those words, "In the beginning, God created," the community comes back to itself. What happened in the moment around that fire is as old as the human story itself. Fear fractures communities. And then something or someone remembers the story and hears again the heartbeat of God and brings the people back to themselves. It's been this way for such a long time. Everywhere in Owies, this is what God's people have done. About 2,500 years ago, the world had fallen apart for the Hebrew people. The Babylonians had came in and they had conquered them, and everything they knew, their city, their temple, their whole way of life had gone. Carried off into exile, into a foreign land, surrounded by foreign people with foreign gods and a foreign language. And the pressure is enormous on the people to assimilate, to disappear, to become Babylonians, to become Assyrians, just to blend in, just to survive, to forget who you are and whose you are. And in the middle of all of that, a scribe sat down and gathered up the history of the people and wrote a poem, a beautiful poem. He wasn't writing historical fact. He was writing story. He was writing what he knew deep down inside himself about who God was and how God got into the world. He was fighting for the soul of the people. So he picked up his pen and he wrote a poem, the poem that we read this morning, because he knew that if the people lost their story, they lost themselves. If they forgot who made them and why and whose they were, then the empire had won. And more importantly, they had lost themselves. So he wrote about the beginning, about how God took a formless void, the chaos, the darkness over the deep, and God created deliberately, lovingly, day by day, and it was good. It was good. It was very good. And in the cadence of that poem, something happens. Listen to the rhythm of it. It was evening, pa-pum. It was morning, Ba-boom. The first day, steady, steady like a heartbeat. The heartbeat of God beating calm and sure when everything around them is chaos and fear and loss, reminding the people of the sound of God's heart that beats inside of them. That poem held a community together. It said, we're not Babylonian, we're not Assyrian, we are not forgotten, we are not alone. We are God's people. We were made by the one who made everything, and that matters, and that will always matter. God was with them in their exile. God was everywhere and always, in the chaos, in the darkness, in the foreign land, hovering and present, creating something new, even in the middle of the worst thing that had ever happened to them. God was there. In the beginning, pa-pum, God created. Pa-pum, the ancient story within, the people remembered who they were and whose they were. And here we are again. It's 2026. The world is fracturing. The climate is shifting in ways that are becoming so apparent. Floods and fires and seasons that do not behave the way they used to. Wars that won't end. Now the Ebola virus is rising again in the Congo, and people are dying of a disease that we have fought before and know how to fight. But the international response is fragmented because the countries that used to show up at the table have stopped showing up. And polarization is tearing at the fabric of communities and nations, left and right, vaccinated and unvaccinated, us and them, always and us and them. And the global community that took decades to build, the agreements, the partnerships, the fragile sense that we're all in this together is being dismantled piece by piece by piece as nations turn inward, concerned only with themselves, pulling up the drawbridge and letting the rest of the world sort itself out. And closer to home, it's a little quieter, but it's just as serious. People are moving inwards too, closing doors, screens replacing rooms. Clubs and service organizations that used to hold communities together are shrinking. Churches are shrinking. And underneath all of it, there's this loneliness epidemic, this people being more isolated than they've ever been in any generation in recent memory. And yet, they are less likely to walk through a door and sit with another human being and say, I need to be here, or I need to be with you, or I need to belong somewhere. We are forgetting how to gather. We are forgetting that we need each other. We are forgetting the story. And yet, here we are. A handful of people who keep showing up, who keep gathering, who keep insisting that we need each other and we need something larger than ourselves to hold on to. So why do we do that? What is it? What is it in us that keeps pulling us back together even when everything in our culture is pushing us apart? I think it's because we realize that we are made for this. We are made for community. We are made for relationship. We are made to belong to each other and to God. And the reason we are made this way is because it is God who made us this way, and it is because this is how God is in relationship. That's what Trinity Sunday is all about, really. It's not a math problem or a doctrine to memorize or argue about or file away in the too hard basket. It's a portrait of what God is like on the inside. And what God is like on the inside is community, is relationship, Father, Son, and Spirit. So caught up in each other, so mutually indwelling, so completely given into one another that they're all combined, that they are one. A God who is never alone, a God who is at the very center of God's self in relationship everywhere and always in relationship. And we are made in that image. This is what Genesis is telling us. Let us make humankind in our image. We are made by a communal God in the image of a communal God for community. This loneliness we are experiencing, this fracturing, is not just a social problem, it's a spiritual one. We are living against the grain of what we are made for. And the church, this small, imperfect gathering of people on this Sunday morning, this church exists to push back against that, to say, come on, come in, sit down. Here is a story. Here you are not alone. Here you are not forgotten. Here you belong. That's why we kept the book. That's why we tell the story. We are the ones who still know the story, who still gather week after week around these ancient words and let them do their work in us. We sit together in the hard times and in the good times and in the in-between times. We bring the casseroles and we make the phone calls and we show up at the funerals. We light the candles and we say, we are here. God is here. This matters. Do not underestimate what happens in this room. It may look small from the outside, but it's not small. In a world that is fracturing and frightened and forgetting, we are the ones who keep showing up. We are the ones who keep reading the story out loud, who keep saying to anyone who will listen, you are God's beloved. You are not alone. Everywhere and always, God is with you. Which brings us to a mountain in Galilee. It's after the resurrection. Matthew tells us the 11 disciples went to Galilee to a mountain where Jesus had told them to go, and they saw him, and they worshiped. And this is the part that I love. Some of them doubted. Right there on the mountain, in the presence of the risen Christ, some of them were still not sure. But Jesus doesn't wait for them to get sorted out. He doesn't say, come back when you've resolved your questions, when your faith is stronger, or when you feel ready. He says instead, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So go and make disciples and baptize and teach and remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. Everywhere and always. Jesus sends the doubters. He sends the uncertain. He sends this little ragged bunch of community that still isn't entirely sure what they witnessed. And he says, you have a story to tell, so go and tell it. And here we are, living in that same story. This is us. Some of us certain, some of us wondering, all of us a little ragged around the edges, none of us entirely sure of what we're doing half the time, and yet we have the story. And we have each other. And we have the one who shows up everywhere and always, shows up in the exile, shows up around that fire on Walton's Mountain, shows up on the mountainside with Jesus, and shows up in this room. So we do what John Boy did. We step forward, we pick up the book, we find whoever can read it, and we ask them to speak it out loud in whatever language reaches the people gathered around that fire. And we begin in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Everywhere and always, God is with us. We are not alone. We have never been alone. Thanks be to God. Amen.